anyone who is afraid of the future. And by that I mean, if you are afraid for the future of humankind because of the state of the world today, here is a little bit of assurance for you. Jesus and his disciples were in Jerusalem for the Passover, and in the midst of the great crowd they became separated from each other. But some Greek persons recognized, perhaps from their Galilean accents, that Philip and Andrew had been with Jesus, and so they took a hold of them by the cloak and said, "We have heard about Jesus. We would like to see him." And so Philip and Andrew went to Jesus and said to Jesus, "There are some Greeks over here and they would like to see you. Should we bring them to you?" Jesus said, "Unless a seed falls into the ground and dies, nothing happens. But if it falls in the ground and dies, it grows up and yields a great harvest." And it's not in the Bible, but I think Philip and Andrew said, "What? Do you want to see these Greek guys or not? If a seed falls..." Now, I will tell you what Jesus saw in that split second before he gave that answer, and I will tell you what he meant by the answer, and I will tell you what it means for us today. When Philip and Andrew said, "Do you want to see these Greek guys?" This is what Jesus saw. In that moment, he saw the history of humankind. From its very beginning to its very end, Jesus saw it all and comprehended it and knew exactly what was happening. And what Jesus saw was a humankind living under the Roman Empire in a state of utter barbarism and cruelty and sadistic, fascistic rule that was crushing humans wherever they were. And Jesus saw a humankind emerging from that oppression into a life of wonder and grace and peace and harmony. Jesus saw the world as it exists today. He saw the world as it will exist 10,000 years from now. What he saw was the way in which humankind could be massively improved and the lot of ordinary human beings changed by a little touch. He recognized, for example, in amongst the era in which we live, that we have seen improvements in human life that are absolutely astounding. In the last 100 years, for example, the lifespan of the average human being has increased by 100%. Such that human beings alive today know the wonder and the joy of seeing their children grow or their grandchildren. My goodness, I know there are some of you here who have great-grandchildren. That's a new thing. We have been given this wonderful joy of seeing life unfold among us, and this only in the past 100 years. We have seen income increase by 200%, and that's taking into account inflation. That's based on the sort of income that you have left over to buy those things that make life wonderful and joyful. In the past 100 years, medicine and health have improved so much that childhood mortality on a global level has been decreased by 90%. The cost of food in the last 100 years, in spite of the price of things at the supermarket today, has in fact been reduced by 90%. It was a time when almost all of the income of all the people in the world, even in North America, was spent just to buy food to survive. The cost of electricity has been reduced by 95%. So stop complaining about your electric bill. And next time you're at the gas station pumping gas and you're thinking, why is transportation so expensive today? Recognize that overall global cost of transportation from one place to another in the last 100 years has been reduced by 99%. The cost of communication has been reduced by 99.9%. Again, in spite of your cell phone bill. Literacy has improved globally from 25% to 80%. Of the poor people in North America, that is, persons designated to be living below the poverty line, 99% have electricity, fresh, running hot and cold water, sanitation, a fridge, and a stove. 95% of people living beneath the level of poverty have cable TV. 88% have a cell phone. 70% have a car and a house, and their house has air conditioning. And yet we deem them to be amongst the poor. Poverty is contextual. No matter how wealthy and how luxurious a society becomes, no matter what wonders we have, there will always be a portion of society that has less than average, and they will always be the poor. They will always exist, but still we need to recognize that today we have a standard of living that allows us to enjoy life infinitely more than people who lived 100 years ago. The poor in North America today have luxuries beyond the wildest dreams of the richest people who lived in the 19th century. The world is getting better. And by that I mean hunger is being reduced. Pain is being reduced. The joy of living is being increased, and the quality of life all the time is on the rise. This, by the way, is no excuse for us to turn our backs on the poor and say, well, look at all that you have. A society must always be striving to raise up whatsoever of its members live below the average. Jesus saw that. He saw the possibility of vast improvement in the way in which human beings live. That's just in 100 years. Jesus also saw a much broader span of humanity in which he was able to recognize that the people living in the 21st century would be living in the most peaceful era of human history. And I know what you're thinking. All we see on the news is warfare, riots, and uprising. How can Mark be so foolish as to say we're living in the most peaceful era in the history of humankind? I always have statistics. You're thinking to yourself, Mark, are you not aware of the Second World War? Not aware of ethnic genocide that happened through the 20th century? Not aware that Hitler killed 6 million people? Well, just so you know, I am not ignorant of history. Hitler didn't kill 6 million people, he killed 12 million people. Mao Zedong, between 1966 and 1978, killed about 78 million of his own citizens. Stalin, 23 million. King Leopold II of Belgium in the Belgian Congo at the end of the 19th century killed 8 million Congolese people. Hideki Tojo in Japan, 5 million. Pol Pot, Cambodia, late 70s, 1.7 million. Ismail Enver in Turkey, including the Armenian genocide, about 2 million people. I am not ignorant of history. And in spite of those numbers, I still have the gall to say we live in the most peaceful era ever of human history. I say that because in The time before the agricultural revolution, 60% of all human beings died as a result of murder, violence, or warfare. 60%. In the 20th century, taking into account all wars and all acts of ethnic genocide, the total percent of people killed by war or violence is 1%. That's a 98% reduction in death by violence and war in that period of time. We live in a time of unprecedented peace and harmony amongst humankind. In spite of anything that you see in the news, the statistics are clear and solid. And those of you who long for the good old days when things were simpler and easier are looking through a mist of deluded nostalgia. In the good old days, you most likely would have been murdered by your neighbor before you turned 20. And nobody would have done a thing about it. Jesus saw that. In the midst of a brutal society, saw the 21st century and what it could become. I know your next question. If statistics indicate that we're living in such an era of peace and prosperity, why is everyone always complaining? And why does everything always look so bad? And there's a few reasons. The one is that we tend to be driven by a part of our brain called the amygdala, connected to the reptilian brain, which has only one goal. It exists to alert us to dangers. And it shuts out all of the good things because good things are not a threat to us. All the good news is totally irrelevant to the amygdala. All that matters is the bad news. The plane crashes, the epidemic diseases, the tsunamis, the earthquakes, the wars, the violence. Those are the only things that we can see because that most primitive part of our brain is always looking for things that are a threat to us. And those things might be. We need to evolve out of the reptile brain. We also think things are bad because our expectations are so high. We expect to live in luxury. We expect to be free of disease. We expect there to be peace. And so any negative thing around us becomes magnified because it is unusual. And of course, things look bad because of the way in which and the efficiency with which news media is able to report disaster. We instantly see every disaster that happens, and so those things expand to fill our minds. But in fact, if you examine history, what you see is a massive change for the better. You see a humankind moving towards peace and harmony and respect for all people. And that's what Jesus saw. When Philip and Andrew said, "Do you want to talk to these Greek guys?" How did the changes happen? How is it that we have reduced childhood mortality by so much? How is it that we have moved from a point of 60% of all people dying by violence to only 1%? In history, there are two great turning points. 2 points at which humankind changed in an exponential way. We leaped forward by a quantum amount at 2 points in history. The one point was the point of the fall of Rome. The fall of an empire built on oppression and brutality. When Rome fell, everything in the whole world changed because human beings were no longer divided up into those who ruled and those who could be crushed. And Rome fell because someone began to whisper a message to the oppressed people. Someone began to say to them, "You are priceless. You are precious. You are beloved in the sight of the Creator of the stars and the planets, and all of humankind are equal, and all of humankind that deserve to live with freedom and justice and peace." And that message started the carpenter in Galilee, who shared it first with some fishermen, who shared it next with their families. The gospel, the good news that love is the greatest power in the universe, that equality is right, that all human beings are infinitely worthwhile. And the second great turning point in history was early in the 16th century, resulting from Gutenberg's press, the Reformation, and the Enlightenment. By 1500, 20 million books had been printed on presses of the Gutenberg style. By 1600, 200 million books had been printed and distributed, and the vast majority of those were either Bibles or commentaries on the Bible by Luther or Erasmus. They were placed in the hands of ordinary people, and they began to read the message, and the message to oppressed people in that time and that context was this: oppression is wrong, because in the sight of God you are infinitely precious, and all humankind are equal and beloved and called to live in harmony. Two great hinges of history: 1st century fall of Rome, 16th century the distribution of the God's Word through the written form. And at the core of the gospel is always the message: love, equality, infinite worth. Caring for others ultimately benefits yourself, and the idea that all human beings are related, so maybe we should stop killing each other. John 20, Philip and Andrew said to Jesus, "Do you want to speak to these Greeks?" And Jesus said, "Unless a seed." What he was saying was, yes, he said, "I better speak to them. And I will plant in their minds the idea of their worth in the sight of God. And then all these things that I have seen in my mind will unfold amongst this Roman Empire," and so on. Jeremiah knew it 800 years earlier. He said, "I will write my law on your hearts. And each person will teach my way to their countrymen, and in the end, no one will have to teach anyone. They will all know it." The gospel has changed the world. And what the gospel can do for the world, we have only begun to see. What it does in the future will be as dramatic as what it has done in the past. And what humankind will be in the future will be as different as we today are from the world 100 years ago and from the world at the time of the agricultural revolution. And it will be glorious. Thanks and praise be to God. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit.